Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, John Poz from the Two-Man Power Trip. Of course, joining me, my co-host, the financial wrestling genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. A special guest today, a writer for The Ringer, a not only an author but a Hall of Fame author already, a publisher of 8 books. I've read 4 of them, so not bad. Still some catching up to do, and a humble man, someone who I've invited to the podcast before. But he said, "Why don't you speak to Steve Kern instead?" But we always wanted to talk to Ian as well. So, Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. And yeah, I didn't mean to slide Kern in front of me ahead of the prior show. I just thought he would be a more valuable contributor with a little more quite a bit more name recognition than me.
No, and we know we have so much to learn. I want to make sure, as we'll be dropping the name of the book many times, but before I turn over to John, author of the recently published Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus, The Rise of Black American Wrestling.
Yeah. Thank you. It was it was certainly a labor of love and a book that I had to talk myself into doing, and the story behind that is pretty interesting. So I imagine we'll be getting into that.
Yeah. So, what is the inspiration behind the book? How did this come about?
Okay. Well, once I finished the second Kern book, when Kern and I worked on his books, we got all of the information together, and then we sort of split it down the middle at a point that made sense within the span of not only his wrestling career, but his life. And then once that was over with, I didn't have any real burning desire to do anything else. But then the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, Pro Wrestling Authors Hall of Fame, which is, it's a little bit misleading, but there's a very fair selection process, in my opinion. If you've written 4 or more books of a certain length and of a certain type, you're in. So it eliminates having to go through some sort of committee or be subject to some sort of vote. Here are the numbers. If you meet this criteria, you're in, which is great. And there were 30 inductees in the initial round that met that criteria. Thankfully, I was one of them. And then I'm scrolling through looking at the faces, 27 white, 2 Japanese gentlemen, and then there is me. And for those that don't know, I'm either black or half black, depending on who you ask. And I was thinking, okay, is there a certain level of responsibility that comes with being that guy? Because I've had people telling me, okay, you're the best black pro wrestling author ever. I don't know that that's true, but if it is true, then do I have any responsibilities that come with that? And if I'm really that guy, then what is it that guy should have done to uphold that position if he's ever asked? And one of the responsibilities I felt that I had was to actually dig deeper into unexplored black wrestling history and see what I could unearth. And I'd done some previous pieces on both Rufus Jones and Jack Claybourne. And well, actually, I'll send it back. I'll send it back to you at the moment so that you can respond to that, and then I can follow up on that.
Just so so why Gentleman Jack? Why Rufus? And what's the history with them?
Oh, okay. So here's what happened. As far as Claybourne went, my initial attraction to Claybourne from a couple of years ago was the fact that he was the first guy who appeared to be a true traveling Negro world champion. That he had his own championship belt. And by the way, I was wrong. That isn't necessarily true. It was Tiger Jack Nelson. And Claybourne sort of inherited that mantle, but he took it to a higher level because he was claiming certain sanctioning of that title that wasn't true. He was claiming it was sanctioned by the New York State Athletic Commission. And ultimately, it appears that may have gotten him into some hot water. But he was traveling from place to place as the traveling Negro World Champion shortly after the establishment of the National Wrestling Alliance. And that appears to have upset some people. But that's what initially drew me to him, that he seemed to be like a black wrestling counterpoint to the NWA champion. As far as Rufus Jones went, I hopped into newspapers.com and I was sort of tracing the evolution of the black wrestlers have hard heads and do a lot of headbutting stereotype. And while there were some black wrestlers who occasionally did headbutts, like the Black Panther Jim Mitchell, Rufus Jones was the guy who made it essentially a style unto itself. And it's after he makes the headbutt heavy style a draw that you start to see a lot of other black wrestlers, including Jim Mitchell, who was his frequent opponent and travel companion. They start to use it excessively. Jim Mitchell starts using it around 1947 when he goes out to California. Jack Claybourne starts to use it in 1949 when he is the champion of Hawaii for an entire year. And Sealy Samara was interacting with Claybourne in Hawaii. And after Sealy Samara leaves Hawaii, he heads back east and he starts the excessive headbutting in his matches. So that really all starts with Rufus Jones. And so you have sort of like the perfect black wrestling hero of the pre-civil rights era and the archetype for the black pro wrestling villain of the era. And a lot of what they developed is still identifiable in the style of black wrestlers, straight through to the 1980s, well after both of them had passed away.
So a lot of historical significance to both men.
Yes. And so as this book sort of snuck up on me because the genesis of the process here was I really wanted to know everything. And so I challenged myself. I made a list of about 40 guys. And to the best of my, starting from 1880 and extending up to about 1950, and I challenged myself to learn everything I could and write 5,000 word summaries on the histories of all of these guys if I could, so that I could sort of have it in my mind. And if it ultimately led to a book, fine. And if not, that was also fine. I don't play video games. I don't have any other hobbies other than working out. So this is what I did with my summer. And it was fine. And I saved certain key figures for last. And when I got to Claybourne, I was getting hit with interesting story after interesting story. And I was at 15,000, even attempting to simplify it. I was at 15,000 words before I even got to Hawaii. And Hawaii was worth 30,000 words. I mean, maybe not 30, but Hawaii was worth 20,000 words unto itself because, other championship reigns aside that may have lasted a month or two that guys may have had, Claybourne being the champion of Hawaii for an entire year was the first time that a promoter, in this case, Al Karasik, really handed the ball to a black wrestler and said, "You're the flagship guy of the promotion. You're the star. We're building this around you. You run with it." That's the first time that had ever happened. So that in and of itself made Claybourne very significant, but it's also in Hawaii that we see him. He's already the most athletic wrestler, especially in his earlier years. He's arguably the most athletic heavyweight there had ever been up until that time. He was famous for acrobatics and for throwing throwing drop kicks in bunches. And that's when he adds a variety of jumping headbutts and cartwheels and other things into his routine, along with the drop kicks. And so by the time he's through with Hawaii, he's developed the style that would eventually be more or less copied by guys like Sweet Daddy Siki, like whole cloth copied, and that you would still see traces of in Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson throughout the 70s and 80s.
With this, right? I mean, you're covering a lot of detail. Sounds like there might be a part two, maybe even after this.
There's no part two to these guys, but I will say, and ordinarily I don't disclose what I'm working on. My projects tend to sneak up on people. Like when it's ready, it's ready. I have total publishing control over my stuff. So as soon as it's live, it goes up. I've never really seen the value of, I'm going to tell everyone I'm working on something, and then I'm going to make them wait a year. And then I'm going to tease that it might be released in 3 months. How about I put it up? If you decide you want to buy it as soon as I put it up, you can buy it. If you decide to wait 3 months and talk yourself into it, it's still going to be there. If you want to wait for early reviewers and first movers to have the first crack at it, and you need that social proof, that's fine too. But once it's live, and anyone who wants to grab it can go grab it. Anyway, I forgot to finish the story. Once I got done with Hawaii, and once I got done with dealing with the back end of Claybourne's career, I simply said, I can't simplify this in a way where I can plug it in neatly with everyone else that I've done a 5,000 word summary on and do it justice. He needs his own book. And that kind of, by the time it got pretty thorough, that sort of settled in around 60,000 words or so. And that's when I made up my mind, okay, I'm going to start. That's when I made up my mind I was going to see if I could do sort of a Claybourne Jones dual socio-historical biography. And it was right when I made that decision that I made a pretty major discovery that gets addressed in the book, and it's going to make some people happy, and it's probably going to annoy some people because it was right under their noses the entire time and they never saw it.
Oh, well, we're gonna have to read the book to know. You don't want to reveal.
I'll tell you.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, great, yeah.
I don't care. So before I sat down to really dig into Rufus Jones stuff, because we more or less established that Rufus Jones' career kicks off in Detroit around 1937 or so. I had on my list of guys to delve into Tiger Flowers. And so I started poking around in the archives, and I pull up what's supposed to be a photo of Tiger Flowers. And I said, well, why is he using Rufus Jones promo photos? And then I go back and I look at a few other cases, especially after 1938, because Tiger Flowers is sporadically popping up here and disappearing, and sporadically popping up there and disappearing. And I look at those and I see the promo photos there, and they're Rufus Jones promo photos. And I read the match descriptions, like, okay, he's doing a whole lot of headbutting and then he's beating people with the Boston Crab. That's a Rufus Jones match. That's the Rufus Jones submission finisher. Now I have to go back and treat this like it's Rufus Jones. And so from that standpoint, I go back and look at the early Tiger Flowers timeline. I know that Tiger Flowers is Joseph Alvin Godfrey. I'm sorry, I know that Rufus Jones is Joseph Alvin Godfrey. So I see early Tiger Flowers. He's in Massachusetts. He's wrestling against Ted Germain. He's briefly the world middleweight champion. And for a very brief period of time, that's 1933, for a very brief period of time in early 1934, he wrestles under his name of Joe Godfrey in a different part of Massachusetts for a different promoter. Then he jumps to New York and he's wrestling as Tiger Flowers. And it's during that period of time when a sculptress by the name of Emily Winthrop Miles sculpts this famous bust of Tiger Flowers' head with this infamous cauliflowered ear. And no one had ever been able to identify the model for the Tiger Flowers bust, which now sits at the Fogg Museum of Harvard University. So, as I'm continuing to go through all of this, we pull up the Tiger Flowers photo from Montreal. It sure looks like Rufus Jones to me. I pull up Joseph Alvin Godfrey's draft registration card. It says right on there under his physical characteristics that he has a single cauliflowered ear. And then we get to later in Rufus Jones' career, one interview in Cincinnati when he's talking about the early portion of his career. And he mentions that this is Rufus Jones. He says, I was taught to wrestle by Ted Germain. And I even won the world middleweight championship. Well, Ted Germain, as far as I can tell, never wrestled outside of Massachusetts, certainly not as far west as Cincinnati, Ohio. Nobody in Ohio knew who Ted Germain was. And it's not like they were paving the way for him to come into the territory. So there was no reason for Rufus Jones to mention that he won the world middleweight championship and he was taught to wrestle by Ted Germain, unless he had been the Tiger Flowers who had wrestled Ted Germain in that area and won the world middleweight championship back in 1933. And so and last but not least, during a period of time when Rufus Jones was wrestling in New Brunswick and Vermont as Tiger Flowers, there was actually an article that ran in Hamilton, Ontario, where they said that Rufus Jones is wrestling under the name of Tiger Flowers out east. And apparently nobody ever caught that. And
wow.
And the funniest thing about all of this to me is Sealy Samara gets his start where that name came from. He was wrestling as the Black Demon George Hodison in northern Massachusetts. When he wrestled in Montreal, they gave him the name Zelis with a Z, Amhara, and he was billed as an Ethiopian. So when Rufus Jones and Sealy Samara are in some cases wrestling each other, some cases not wrestling one another, but they're on the same tour, you would see them in Ontario one night billed as Rufus Jones and Sealy Samara. And then the next night they're wrestling in Montreal as Zelis Amhara and Tiger Flowers. And people who weren't studying Black wrestlers as a category, but were only studying territories and weren't tracking the patterns, they just would have said, oh, Tiger Flowers is just popping up sporadically for matches here and there. But they weren't actually making the connection that Rufus Jones and Tiger Flowers were the exact same wrestler. So that has been a mystery that has held for 90 years.
Jeez Louise, that is crazy. I love that you're unearthing history here. So that's great. But let me hand it over to Lavie, because I know Lavie has a lot of questions.
Yeah. So as a published author for many years now. I think The Realest Guy in the Room was published in 2016. How do you think the market has changed for wrestling books? Just an aside, going back to the 90s, searching for a wrestling book in a bookstore, for example, was like a difficult endeavor. The only book on the bookshelf was like Ted DiBiase's very thin book, which was half religious philosophy, I guess is a way to put it. Or you could buy online Arn Anderson Forever, which was another thin book that I loved. And then suddenly Mick Foley's book came out, and things were off to the races with books. And certainly as Amazon and self-publishing tools and small publishers developed, there were so many books that came out. But I think overall that interest and excitement level has dissipated. Like it's harder to stand out as an author of wrestling books. So how do you think the market has changed in the last 9 years?
Well, over the last 9 years, I mean, I think for the most part, it's the same. You still get a flood of independent wrestling books on the market, unless you have a well-known author who has generally made their name covering other subject matter, and they've been successful, and then they pitch their topic to a publisher, and it gets approved on the basis that this author already has a name and they already have a following and they're worth the investment. Unless you have that sort of a name recognition advantage going into it, the primary folks who are getting their books published are active WWE or AEW wrestlers or retired wrestlers who are major names. And that's where, and those are the folks that are making the serious money. Otherwise, if you're on the fringes of that level of fame, I would always suggest to an author that they probably stand to make more money if they go the independent book publishing route. I'll just give you an example. ECW Press, my understanding of an average ECW Press deal, and if I'm wrong, so be it, and someone can come on here and tell me I was wrong. My understanding of an average ECW Press publishing deal is they will give up to a $5,000 advance if they're interested in the book. They might give the person a little more money. They're subsidized by the Canadian government. So if the author is Canadian, they get money that defrays some of the costs. If the subject of the book is Canadian, they're given money that helps to defray some of the costs. Or if the subject is from a disadvantaged population, they're subsidized in a way that helps to defray some of the costs. But aside from that, a standard deal would be a $5,000 advance, and you would assume that they're making, the presumption is that the author of the book is making about a $1 per book royalty. Whereas if the same author chooses to publish on Amazon directly, they get total control over the content. They don't have anyone telling them, oh, we want to save on our printing costs, so you're capped at 300 pages. They can publish 400, 500, 600, whatever they want, as long as they understand that there's an additional cost hit after they pass certain page number thresholds. But once they release a book through Amazon, they're probably going to make between $7 and $9 per book, at least that's sold in the United States, in terms of the money that goes directly into their pocket. And if they're charging between $20 and $25 per book. So even if they think they might be within 1,000 or 2,000 books sold, in comparison to what they could publish with a major or semi-major publisher versus what they think they could sell on their own, financially, it's probably in their best interest to go the independent route, especially if they have an active social media account and they can repeatedly hammer their followers with inducements to go buy the book.
So certainly, with your first book publishing with like Dan Severn and so on, and Hornswoggle, you know that there's an audience built in, and certainly with your current book and one very recently on pro wrestling in the Caribbean. Hopefully, I'm not mixing up my geography.
Bahamian Rhapsody. So you'll get slammed by a lot of Bahamians who will tell you that the Bahamas is technically not in the Caribbean Sea; it's in the North Atlantic.
Okay, thank you. I knew I was not necessarily close, but sort of around that. So
it's
I'm assuming
nerdy geography.
Yes, no, thank you. I'm assuming that those you more sort of bet on yourself, right? Like there's not necessarily that apparent audience that's active and out there that you'll know. Okay, yeah, 1 million people follow Dan Severn on Facebook or whatever. Like a certain percentage will buy. Here, you're like, I'm going to invest the time. This is something that I'm passionate about. So when did you first feel confident I'm going to do a project like that?
Well, you're asking some great questions, and I'm going to work backwards, and I'm going to start from the financial angle of that, and this is probably going to drive you nuts. But this was a case, especially Bahamian Rhapsody. That was a case where I really didn't care. That was a book where if I was going to write one book about one topic, and I was going to master that topic, I wanted it to be the history of pro wrestling in the Bahamas, which is my mother's home country and my wife's home country. And the first, if you've read the book, I don't know if you have, the first wrestling event I ever saw live was one of Steve Kern's PWF shows in Nassau. That was with Dusty Rhodes and Big Steel Man in the main event. The Nasty Boys were on the card. Scott Levy was on the card as Scotty Flamingo. There's a Raven. Scott Hall, Nasty Boy. Yeah. Mike Graham. And I'd always had questions about Bahamian pro wrestling ever since then. So that book took me forever. I had to interview Mike Rotunda. I had to interview Dory Funk. I got Butch Reed on the phone for all of 25 seconds before he said he had to go, and I never got to talk to him again before he passed away. But I got original interviews with about 40 people for that book, and that was more of a test to myself to see if I could do it. There was no financial motivation whatsoever, and if I could do it, then great. And it was the same thing sort of with Gentleman Jack and Rough Rufus. Like the wrestling authors who impressed me were the ones who could do anything. And I'm really putting Scott Teal and John Cosper in that category. They could serve as an excellent co-author and manage a wrestler's story, but then they could also do a territorial history, like John Cosper's books on the history of wrestling in Louisville. And then they could also do a fantastic biography of a departed wrestler where they're doing all of the research themselves and telling the story themselves. So in saying all of that, Bahamian Rhapsody was primarily a test of myself to see if I could get everything together that was required to tell the story that I would have wanted to read as the guy who had all the questions.
You're inspiring me now to do my Martin the Blimp Levy book.
Yeah,
it's been on my mind. Yeah,
he gets mentioned in this.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. Wow. Okay, so not only overall guidance, but I may need some direction once I get started.
Yeah.
So I know
Claybourne slams him in Boston.
Yes. Oh, wow. So 650 pounds or so build, right?
Yeah.
So I know you had mentioned that you don't talk about specific projects until they're out there in the world, but of these options, like, what are you thinking about next? Is it a territory? Are they particular figures? Do you want to co-author again sometime soon?
I would love to co-author with Mike Rotunda, and I are pretty close. I would love to co-author a Mike Rotunda autobiography. Aside from that, I am about 120,000 words into a comprehensive Black pro wrestling history book, like 1880 to 1950. Really want to cover the pre-civil rights era. And I've made a lot of interesting discoveries over the course of working on that book and researching that book, one of which got covered in The Ringer this morning. And that was the article is up on the Ringer's website right now. Should be on the main page right now, and it's under the title of The Curious Case of Clarence Bolden.
Amazing. Let me turn over to John.
So where can everybody find your books, get your books, read you, and reach out and touch you?
Every single one of the books is on Amazon. You can go to Amazon.com right now and find all of them. If you'd like to read any of my other work, my best wrestling stuff, you might find a few pieces on Mel Magazine, on the Mel Magazine website. Like I interviewed Dave Meltzer. That was a 40th anniversary of the Wrestling Observer piece. I had a fun interview with hold on. Why am I blanking on her name right now? This is terrible. DDS, AEW, Dr.
Britt
Baker.
Baker.
Goodness gracious. Yeah. And this is really bad because I've interviewed her at least three separate times, once for The Ringer as well.
Ian, if you know the show, I ask John for such support every week. Where it's sort of like a guessing game where I give a few hints and then he knows who I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's necessary. My brain is so full of Black wrestling history tidbits right now that it's pushed everything else out, and I'm having trouble remembering the most basic things right now. But yeah, all my best wrestling content is up at theringer.com right now. If you go to Google and you type in Ian Douglas and you type in The Ringer, it should bring up my profile page.
All right. Awesome. Ian, thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much, and congrats on being a #1 bestseller on the wrestling category on Amazon. And it's sticking to it. It's #2 at the moment, so lots of interest.
That's news to me. I'm happy when it reaches #1, and then I zone out and ignore it because I don't want to see it as it plummets back down the charts. So I appreciate you for letting me know that it's holding up well.
And Brute Bernard is #15, so you'll be dominating the list soon.
Outstanding. Thank you, guys.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey.
Right, Lavie, let's get to some news. What is the latest in TNA wrestling?
So we're going to ping pong a little around with TNA, all different things. So first of all, I was just thinking about the talents that are appearing on NXT, and certainly they're all across the board, from the champion Joe Henry, really most buzzworthy, all across. But most recently, it's been interesting that they've been focusing on Moose and the Hardys, and I want to specifically mention Jeff Hardy because, like we mentioned last week, they've had difficult situations in the past, some of their own making, maybe of their own making, depending on how you define it, especially with Jeff, and potentially addiction issues and so on. But two people that maybe the WWE wants to feature as stars, and obviously to varying degrees they have that, or they've been that, but it's a risk for them. So here, by putting TNA talent on WWE NXT, if something bad happens, they could say, well, this step removed. So TNA has been serving now sort of like as a place where you could bring in talent that could be risks and putting them on television. And then if it doesn't work out, just saying like, oh, okay, that wasn't really our thing. So that's just something to watch, just some speculation on it. Next, and as we've been covering for weeks, this Super Slam 3, which was not thought of as a TNA event, but in some degree it is, as they were listed as the sponsor. And one of the Anthem executives was actually there and quoted in an article on the Peninsula. So Doha, Qatar, the QPW organized Super Slam 3 concluded on Saturday to great fanfare and spectacular performances. Wrestling fans in Qatar were treated to 2 unforgettable wrestling nights with big names gracing the Ladies' Hall at Aspire Zone. Many of Qatar's citizens and residents thronged the venue to see their favorite superstar in action, with families coming in droves. So just kind of comment on that. So depending on the shots that you'll see in this article, but one of them shows clearly several seats, just a little bit rising from the ring, that are empty. So I don't know what the attendance was, but I mean, people could throng and still have a venue that's not full, because it's a 4,000 seat venue, but a little bit of alliteration there. The first night of wrestling action saw great matchups that had the crowd on its feet for the majority of the event. Alberto Del Rio, Mick Foley, Jinder Mahal all made appearances. So this is the part that's really interesting for the TNA side. Speaking to the Peninsula, Neeral Merchant, Chief Financial Officer of Anthem, said that the event was beyond expectations. World-class production, quality, the talent they have been able to assemble from a global base is just amazing. Merchant also described his thrill at seeing a number of local talents being given the opportunity to shine. TNA Wrestling was among the many partners for the event, which include the Qatar calendar by Visit Qatar, which is part of tourism. Thriller TV. I know I was struggling to to say that last week, as broadcasting partner, and a local radio station, and so on. So this is an executive at Anthem that we don't often hear about. His role isn't necessarily forward-facing from like a publicity perspective, but from an infrastructure role, Neeral's role is very important. So from Anthem's website and also LinkedIn, 18 years experience as CFO to companies in media, formerly at KPMG, which is a very well-respected accounting financial firm, expertise in M&A, so clearly, given the way that Anthem has worked. So he's been managing real estate, I guess, on the side, or in addition to Anthem, but he's been the CFO of Anthem for 10 years, which we've talked about for if you stick with Anthem, then you really stick with Anthem. Where we've seen challenges and the merry-go-round is executives come in and out later. So let's talk about some of their events now. So El Paso, WrestleTix had it that the floor setup was 557, and all of those seats are gone. It's a 6,500 seat venue, so most of the seats, at least those that were opened, were GA. So Mike Johnson at PW Insider had a report. 2 weeks to go before El Paso, PW Insider can confirm that ticket sales for Sacrifice are expected to surpass the total ticket sales of Victory Road in San Antonio. That event was over 2,000 fans. The advanced ticket sales for both El Paso shows, Sacrifice and the 315 taping, will likely be the largest individual live event TNA paid attendances in the United States in years. According to sources, TNA will have to open up more seats due to demand for both nights at the El Paso County Coliseum. So that's that. Other shows on the docket right now, the St. Joseph Civic Arena in Missouri. That is, much slower. The first and second row mostly are gone, a little bit here and there. The TNA show Unbreakable, which is in the Cox Pavilion, that does not have an open ticket map, but we know the pricing levels. So from reserved fourth row and up, $75, second and third row, $110, front row, $180, and GA a little bit over $52. In LA, the Galen Center, as we've talked about, it's listed as not many seats left, but that probably means that the GA hasn't opened up everything, because I think there's a lot more room to go. There are a fair amount of floor seats still remaining in a modest setup. The Breen Event Center in Brompton, Ontario, as we're recording this, is about when their tickets are going on sale, so I don't yet have that venue information. Talking about Slammiversary, so an update from WrestleTix. 68 seats gone since 7 days ago. This is following an appearance from Joe Henry, Masha Slamovich, and so on at an Islanders show. So moving around a little bit more, so 2,204 tickets gone. Interestingly, and as we know, Anthem owns a sure if you define it as like movie distribution, but in the movie business, sometimes they buy the rights to film. I don't know if they have any stake in Queen of the Ring, or they're just working to promote it, or maybe there's just a good relationship there that they were willing to promote it. But at the least on their X account, they shared about Queen of the Ring. Are you planning to see that, John, when that comes out in a couple weeks?
Probably not in the movies, but I definitely will watch it once it hits like Netflix. Once it hits streaming, I'm definitely going to watch it.
For me, like, to be able to see it, like, guaranteed, I think I have to see it in the movies. I wanted to see that Bob Dylan movie that came out around Christmas time, but I still haven't seen it yet. Every night I'm thinking, oh, okay, we'll buy it tonight, and then it just gets too late. So sometimes just to like be locked in to be able to see it, going to the movies is helpful.
Yes, for sure. What is going on with Triller, your favorite Triller?
So as we're recording this, or a little bit before we start recording this, the stock was at 90 cents. So it went back over $1 a little bit this week, but it became generally a penny stock. And the market valuation right now is 146 million total for the company. So it seems like a low number, given what sports and tech properties have gone for, because of course they have the bare knuckle fighting. We talked about the pillow fighting, but the the Triller app, the Fight Plus. I don't know what the AGBA financial stuff is, but there's a lot of value there. But also, we've heard reports of owing people money and so on. So I don't know what debts there are too. I think in a month is expected to be their next quarterly earnings report. So that'll be something interesting. But somebody who has more knowledge would have to look into this. But in the NASDAQ, if you stay $1 for a year, then you're delisted, which then it's really hard to trade the stock. So it's only a few days, and they might have dipped back over and under again. So it's not in danger of that yet, but it's something to think about when the price is this low.
What is going on with GC Dub?
So firstly, and on its face, it's not a GCW story, although Brett commented on just being interested in the event. The 25th anniversary gathering of legends in Thornville, Ohio, at Legends Valley, August 13th to 16th. So one of those old school Juggalo gatherings, maybe like Cave and Rock, Illinois, or maybe not. But I believe this is the event that Violent J referred to, when he was on our podcast, and we asked Brett about this, but it hasn't really been talked about, and it's still quite far away. So that's probably why. But I think a Game Changer versus Juggalo feud carrying out of an event like this, or leading into an event like this, has a lot of potential. Like, imagine, when I think back on that Ring of Honor CZW feud, like, you could really get people that have an allegiance to one group and another, really like
time.
Getting into it. So
yes.
I think there's a lot of potential there. Which side would you sit on, John?
That is a good one, because I love me some ICP. So that's a tough one. ROH back in the day, I was 100% ROH, but I was at those shows and we got there a little late, so we had to sit on the CZW side. Man, that was some brutal stuff back in the day. But yeah, I don't know. I guess you'd have to go GCW, but I don't know. I love ICP so much. That's good. That would be tough. I love Violent J.
So I'm going to give an answer that's for my safety. So I'm going to sit on the Juggalo side because I saw what happened to Tila Tequila when they didn't like her. So for people that might throw batteries, rocks, bottles, right? Like, okay, like maybe, yes, I do follow GCW more than the Juggalos, but just in case, maybe they've calmed down in the last 15 years or it's a new generation, right? Like, you don't really have like those old school ECW fans, right, anymore. GCW isn't like that, although it's kind of like the spirit of that. But like, just for my safety, the Juggalo side. But in terms of other things, so Kansas City, they debut there, I believe, just announced June 22nd, so something to watch. So last time we went through every collective show. I don't think it's worth doing it every week, but and thanks to WrestleTix, I do have the figures in total and the average. So thus far, for 11 collective shows, 8,011 tickets distributed, 728 ticket average. Now, John, it doesn't always become circular on this show, but sometimes it does. So I'm referencing you. So Joey Janela facing Sabu at Spring Break 9 seems unlikely following surgery. Everything's up in the air. So, John, I didn't have a time to watch it yet. I will. So how up in the air do you think it is? And do you think GCW should get the word out more that this match may not be happening?
It's definitely very, very up in the air. Might not happen. So he said it just might not happen just because his arm, his doctor might not let him, and that might not be clear. It's going to have to be cleared ahead of time. So he's even saying that they're going to push the match back. So it's not going to happen. They'll both be there, but the match won't be happening. They might have to push it back. But I think that announcement will be soon.
Okay, because I feel like, and again, this show always does well. So I think when last we checked, it was 1,050 tickets, something like that, as the lead show. But some people, I think, are going specifically, of course, to see Sabu's retirement and his last match. So you really have to get the word out if that's not going to happen. I don't know how much you have to do preemptively, but with a fair amount of window of time. So just looking at GCW's post gathering, collective, mixing up GCW and JCW in my mind, post collective shows. So May 17th in Joppa, Maryland, June 20th in Little Rock, July 11th in Dallas, Bloodsport, which you talked about in London, on September 28th, and Anchorage, Alaska on October 4th. So a lot of filling in till then. Of course, we'll hear a lot more after the collective. So just in terms of this weekend, as the weekend's coming up as we're recording this, it's looking a little rough there in San Diego. We'll see ultimately, what it turns out to be, but 10 or more ringside reserved, VIP still available. GA, of course, 10 or more still available. In LA, the third row was close to being sold out, and the stage already was, and so on. But the fourth row and beyond had 10 or more tickets left. And in Arizona, the second row looked like it was nearly gone, but the third row and beyond had 10 or more tickets left. And talking about post collective, Brett hinted a little bit on Twitter. Been working really hard to line up a memorable summer for GCW, bringing back some classics, lined up some special new venues and cities, returning overseas. The GOTJ, I'm not sure what that is at the moment, celebrating our history and 10th anniversary, returning to the yard, another Outlaw Mud Show. So not all those references do I get, but we'll diagnose that or dissect that at a different time.
What is going on with NWA? Are they adding territories?
Yeah, NWA New Mexico, Duke City Championship Wrestling. Welcome to the fold. And then just looking at their Dothan Civic Center show, NWA Hard Times, it's getting closer and closer, March 22nd. A few rows of seats gone. We'll see if that picks up, with local promotion over the next month.
How about Bushi Road? What's the latest with Bushi?
So first is an announcement of a couple women's shows, Spark Joshi, Lady Luck, and Stardom American Dream 2025. These both, have different ticket tiers, but not a map. So we'll see what happens with that. But in terms of New Japan, as we talked about, I considered a big success so far. Windy City Riot has distributed 3,051 tickets. 293 in the last 7 days. WrestleTix notes that a reduction in price looks to have helped move a bunch of tickets. Back rows of certain rows are now $19 per ticket. That's really cheap for an event in a major city, even if it's back row. And Resurgence in the Toyota Arena, Ontario, California. That's not till May. So tickets at 654 distributed.
Now, as far as HOG, House of Glory, what is going on with them? They got a big show coming up.
Yeah, so John, we'll have a few quick hits. I'm sorry to disappoint. They did not make an official here and there section, but this could sort of feel like, in theory, the here and there section. So just looking at, of course, Mercedes Monet's forthcoming appearance on March 15th. The fifth row is sold out at $55 a ticket. So I think that just speaks to demand and interest, which is there, but pricing fans potentially out of the market. So fourth row isn't that much more, 65, third row 85, second row 100, front row 150. So I think once you start getting 85 and above, and VIP stage 185 for something that's in a nightclub in Jamaica, Queens, it's kind of a harder sell there, but it might still get there.
Now, new aka NEW, they've got a show coming up. What is the connection here with WB? What is that all about?
Oh, sure. So this is my, besides, I consider Madison Square Garden my home arena, but geographically and somewhere that I went to many times as a youth, the Westchester County Center. So that to me was always the top C town, because it's a smaller suburb outside New York City in Westchester. WWE always did well there. So I think potentially the last time WWE was there, June 1st, 2024, 4,295 tickets gone, according to Cage Match. So a sellout, likely. So this is a market that they haven't been in a while. NEW had been good has a history of success, is the better way to put it, with bringing in star wrestlers that aren't affiliated or can appear places. So they potentially have given up the Mid-Hudson Civic Center, right? We know a new promotion is running it. Maybe they could run it themselves too and compete. But they're coming a little bit, I guess you would call it south, right? Closer to the city. And running the county center with the Hardys, which talking about, Jeff's issues that kind of burned them a couple of summers ago. MVP, Shelton Benjamin, Mick Foley to appear, and Mickey James to appear. So it's sort of that sort of thing for casual wrestling fans, especially a little bit lapsed, that sort of are in and around the Yonkers, Westchester, and so on area. And you're oh, okay, I know those people. Let's go see that show on a Saturday night. So I'm really curious to see how that ends up doing.
What about the CW? What's going on with CW?
So the CW will be profitable, they predict, by 2026 with their focus on sports. The overhaul of programming at the CW has been the key driver of results on the bottom line. Along with laying off a number of senior execs and lowering overall costs, the network has made a dramatic shift towards sports and unscripted fare. In 2025, it will air about 400 hours of sports or sports-adjacent fare, accounting for about 40% of total programming time, a dramatic change from the old CW, which has no sports programming whatsoever. In 2025, we are seeing our new programming investments start to pay dividends. While sports rights are often expensive, the CW has sought out more affordable offerings as it's established itself in the marketplace. Its portfolio has included college football and basketball, NASCAR's Xfinity Series, a junior circuit of the stock car race, and a similar up-and-coming subsidiary of the WWE and WWE NXT. So from what I understand, I haven't listened to the whole call yet. The success of NXT on CW was one of the highlights of the TKO call. And I know that CW has a several years deal with NXT, so a long way to go. But given the success thus far, I think that WWE may be able to cash in the next time around on a pretty good rights increase for NXT. I would guess maybe even like 3 to 5 times rights increase, depending on what the market looks like.
Yes. But here's the most important story of the day. What is going on with you and Linda McMahon? Tell us, obviously, about CCNY.
Yes. So be there. March 11th from 3:30 to 4:45. I'm crossing over my academic career with my pro wrestling interest. Understanding Linda McMahon, Secretary of Education in age of TrumpMania. There with I'm moderating a panel with some great speakers, including Gary Rifkin, Mark Erlewine, and one that everyone will know, past guest of the show and prolific writer, Brian Solomon, author, journalist, and even formerly of the WWE. Go to Eventbrite to get your free ticket, or probably the easiest on WrestleTix. Sorry, not WrestleTix, on my own Twitter. That's funny. I have it pinned at the top so you can follow that link to Eventbrite. But imagine if WrestleTix was covering the tickets distributed for this event. That would be pretty funny.
That'd be amazing. I love that. Now, let's hit the plugs here and head towards the finish. You follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2ManPowerTrip. How about you, Lavie?
Follow me on X, Lavie Marg, LavieMarg. And if you want a primer for Linda McMahon and politics and wrestling and so on, check out TrumpMania on Amazon.
All right. Thank you to Lavie. Thank you to Ian. Thank you to everybody out there for listening. See you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.